Welcome, this is lesson 6.4, solving absolute value equations. Our goal today is to be able to solve absolute value equations. So if you look at first, it says absolute value equations have, and it's most of the time they have two solutions. There are some special cases which we'll talk about in a second, but absolute values for the most part have two solutions to them. So just a quick example, trying to get in your head what's happening. The absolute value of x equals 8. Well, if I put in a positive 8, the absolute value of positive 8 is 8. So obviously, x could equal 8. But also, if I put in negative 8, because what's in the absolute value becomes positive, so x could also equal negative 8. So there's two possible solutions in this case, 8 and negative 8. So what we're really doing here is we're using the fact that the expression inside the absolute value symbols can either be positive or negative to help us determine what the two solutions would be. Okay? Now, there's kind of three steps that are involved when you're solving an absolute value equation. Step one is to isolate the absolute value. Basically means to get it by itself so that you can set up your two cases. So you set your two equations equal to the positive, which is the first case, and the negative, which is our second case. And then you just simply solve for the variable that's left. So the good news here in example 1 is that the absolute value is already by itself. So step 1 is done. So what I'm going to do is set the equation equal to 6 and negative 6, and there are my two answers, because there wasn't any work to be done. But in number 2, although the absolute value is by itself, I'm going to separate this as x minus 2 equals positive 5, the first case being positive, and x minus 2 equals negative 5. There's my second case. So in this first case, I'm going to add 2 to both sides, and x equals positive 7. In the second case, I'm going to add 2 to both sides, but negative 5 plus 2 is negative 3, so my two answers there would be positive 7 and negative 3. Again, the absolute value was already isolated, so I skipped right to step 2 in both of these problems here. Now in our third example, again, the absolute value is by itself, so that's good news. I'm going to go about setting up my two cases and then solving. So my first case is negative 7 minus 3x equals 2. My second case is negative 7 minus 3x equals negative 2. I'm going to solve each of these like it's its own problem. Add 7. 2 plus 7 is 9. So negative 3x equals 9. Divide by negative 3. X equals negative 3. In this case here, same steps. I'm going to add 7, but negative 2 plus 7 would give me positive 5. Then I'm going to divide by negative 3. So this is a fraction, negative 5 thirds, or negative 1 2/3. I'm actually going to leave the improper fraction and just say x equals negative 3 and negative 5 thirds. Now in example 4, this is the first time we're going to actually have to isolate the absolute value. So what we're going to do here is first we're going to add 6 to both sides. So the absolute value of 7x minus 4 equals 10. Now I have the absolute value by itself. Once the absolute value is by itself, you can set up your two cases. 7x minus 4 equals 10. 7x minus 4 equals negative 10. Then you just go about solving them. Add 4 to both sides. 7x equals 14. Divide by 7, x equals 2. Add 4 to both sides here. 7x equals negative 6. Divide by 7, x equals negative 6/7, a fraction. So x equals 2 and negative 6/7. Now in example 5, again, we have to go about getting this absolute value by itself. So my first step here is to subtract 3. So the absolute value of 5 minus 4x equals 11. Now that I have the absolute value by itself, I'm going to set up my two cases. 5 minus 4x equals 11, and 5 minus 4x equals negative 11. Solve each case, subtract 5, negative 4x equals 6. Divide out the 4, that would be 6 over negative 4, which reduces to negative 3 halves. On this side, I'm going to subtract 5 from each side. Negative 4x equals negative 16. Divide out the negative 4. X equals positive 4. So x equals 4 and negative 3 halves. Now, it may also have it where you have to isolate it where it's attached. If it's attached, to isolate it, you have. So if you have it where it's attached, like negative 2, absolute value of x minus 4 equals negative 18, and it's attached, you may have to divide out that negative 2 to get rid of it, because we have to isolate the absolute value. You just do that to each side. So the absolute value of x minus 4 equals 9. So x minus 4 equals 9, and x minus 4 equals negative 9. You add 4 to both sides, x equals 13. Add 4 to both sides here, x equals negative 5. So my final answer is x equals 13 and negative 5. Now you remember I said at the beginning, it's most of the time we have two solutions. It is possible to just have one solution. Let me show you an example of that here. To get one solution, what we would do is we would add 7 to both sides here, and we would have the absolute value of negative 5 plus x equals 0. Because it's equal to 0, we can only set up one case. There's not two cases that we could use here. So, negative 5 plus x equals 0. Add 5 to both sides. X equals 5. So we just get one solution in that case. Now it is also possible to get no solution. No solution will happen right here, and I'll show you an example of it, and then we'll talk about why that happens. So, first step would be to isolate the absolute value. Subtract 10 from both sides. The absolute value of 5x equals negative 30. Now you may be thinking that you can set up two cases for this, but even though if you set up the two cases, it's going to give you two answers that do not work, because absolute value itself always turns out to be positive. So if absolute value is set equal to a negative number, the answer is always no solution. So because we had the absolute value of 5x equal to negative 30, the final answer there is no solution. Okay? So putting this all together today, there's three possible solutions in absolute value equations. Two solutions happen when absolute value equals a positive. One solution happens when absolute value equals 0. And no solution happens when absolute value equals a negative number. Remember, our first step is to isolate the absolute value. Our second step is to set up the two cases for the absolute value. The third step is to solve for the variable.